Hi, this is Will, and this is a project for INLS 720, which is metadata. And I selected a organization for this project, the Digital Comic Book Museum, which basically uploads digital comics and allows users to upload digital comics actually in what are called CBZ or CBR formats. So it's basically an archive of digital images that you can then download and read. And there are a couple of applications out there that will allow you to read these things. So that's sort of the resource that we're dealing with. I wanted to give you an example. This is a comic, right? It's a comic called Cow Puncher. It's Cow Puncher #1. And this is the sort of thing that you would download. You get a bunch of images and they're in a compressed file, and so then you point your application at them and then you get this big image and you can switch to the next page. So that's what we're dealing with here. And this gives the opportunity for there are a couple of interesting things about this. The first is that there are two user groups. There's really the employees at the Digital Comic Museum who are trying to organize and process all of these things, and so they have a few needs that they have. And then there's also the users, the actual patrons of the website who are looking for comics and downloading comics and want to know things about the comics, and they want to be able to find things. So that's really sort of a retrieval task that we have to address. The other thing that's interesting about it is that as a digital object, comics have both images, but they also have text, which means that I can use a couple of different metadata schemas to address those descriptive problems. So the actual schemas I used within my METS schema were VRA for the actual digital objects, and then mix to describe these image aspects of the comic, and then TextMD to describe the text aspects of the comic. So I use both of those underneath and other times within the METS schema to extend the descriptions. I also added some of my own additions, which we will look at. So let's look at the application profile that I designed. I want to go through some of the XML that I put in to my overall METS organization. And highlight some of the places where I made changes or places that are just particularly important for this particular application. So one of those places was the agent set of the VRA schema. And this basically indicates the people who are involved in creating or bringing about the object that you're looking at. So for us, this would be primarily be artists and writers. So I made these explicit topics because I wanted those to be commonly available in the collection, and I wanted people to be encouraged to add them. In VRA, it was pretty much just an agent element up here with an attribute of role, which would indicate how they were related. And they have artist and writer roles, but I wanted to add specific sections so that you could more easily sort by and browse by artist and writer parts of the metadata. And basically these are controlled by a scheme which I got from the Union List of Artist Names published by Getty. So you can, it's basically a fixed attribute on these names which indicate what authority you are getting your name from. So that was quite useful. And then the next area where I had some extensions was in the subject set. So the subject set is describing the actual content of the digital object that people are accessing it for. Here I added, from TextMD, I added language and alt language because VRA had languages by title and by inscription, but I wanted sort of a broad definition of primarily what language is this comic in, or what set of languages is it in. And then I also had a couple of my own elements that I added here. The panel direction is an important thing because if you have people from different countries, they very often will have panels that move in different directions. but it doesn't necessarily track with languages. So you can have something in English or in Japanese that has different panel directions. And if a Japanese comic is being published in the United States, sometimes they will mirror the comic, so they will mirror the actual image and flip it such that the panels are actually moving in the other direction. So it's important to know whether they've done that or not. So this would be an interesting thing for users, particularly to know what the panel direction is. The other thing that I added, and I think this is an important part, is the character element. So the character element basically indicates what characters are in the comic. And this is a important thing, I think, for comics, because characters, there's a lot of overlap of characters between comics, and a lot of characters in comics will appear in other comics that are not their own. So it would be interesting to be able to search comics and find comics based on which characters are in them, and to be able to see which characters might be guest starring in a particular issue or whatever. And this is basically indicated by a character authority list. And this is a restricted string, and basically indicates places like DBpedia and Freebase, which will have URIs, and that's the symbol type that I've associated with this element. They will have URIs for fictional characters. And then there's also other sections, so you could add, potentially other knowledge bases in the future will have this information as well. So you can indicate where you're getting your URI from. So the AMD section, Administrative Metadata section, under this section, one place where I had an addition was under work type. So I added a distribution element, which indicates how this object was initially distributed. And this is interesting to collectors, people who are interested in the industry of comic books and are comic book buffs are very interested in was this a periodical issue? Was this issued in a volume, or was it issued digitally? Is this a webcomic, whatever? And so I felt like this was an important aspect of the comic that was not included so much in the VRA. It might have been included more in mods or something like that, but VRA didn't have an explicit section for this. So I wanted to include that in work type, and the work type, I believe, is included in the source area of the AMD section. So we'll look at that in a second too. The measurement set, this was the area where I had probably the largest expansion, and this is where a lot of the mix and TextMD elements went in. I was able to give sort of an extent of the digital object by using mix elements to describe the visuals in the comics, and then using TextMD elements to describe the actual text associated with the comics. So here we have the basic digital object information, but then down here we have color encoding. So you can see the color map. I think is particularly important. You can have your RGB, 1998 or whatever. And then I added the text encoding. This is important for OCR documents. If you get text out of it, you can get the encoding and character information from that. And then I also added a sort of simplified page dimensions element so that it would be easy to get the dimensions of the page. The mix and text encoding descriptions of this, and even the VRA to a certain extent, are very complicated and very sophisticated, and they're not always in simple inches or millimeters or whatever. So this is basically just a very simple restricted string that has inches, millimeters, pixels, I believe, also. And then you just type in your dimensions here. So that was the measurements section. And then I also added the image capture metadata. And primarily for this application, this would be mostly scanner stuff. So you are scanning these digital comic books. You want to include information about what scanner you used and resolution and all of that. So then, and this would all go into the technical metadata section of the AMD section. All of this XML was basically just injected into that section. So then the image processing, this goes into the digital provenance section of the AMD section. And this basically describes, it's a VRA element with a bunch of mix elements. And it basically describes how the image was edited or what preservation techniques were used on the digital object in order to maintain it. And this is important information to have down the road, right? So that was really the application profile that I developed, the XML that was going to go into the METS structure. But I want to look at the METS structure a little bit. These are the basic elements. It has the METS header, which is basically information about me, creating the metadata. A lot of the VRA went into the descriptive metadata section. Then this administrative metadata section is where a lot of the mix and TextMD stuff went in, and also some VRA. And then in a minute, we'll look at the file section and the structural map, which indicate the actual objects being described. I did not find, I couldn't come up with an excuse for using the structural link. I think maybe if you were archiving websites or something like that, the structural links would be more useful. But I didn't come up with a particular use for that in this application. The behavior section, I included a couple of applications that would be required to access these files. So how do these files act when you use particular applications on them? That's the basic idea behind the behavior section. So let's look at the actual XML. I have the file section here. And the file section is basically just 3 file groups. And the file groups are the published group. So this is basically the actual CBR, CBZ, or CBZ file that would be published on the website, right? But then also I have a file group for the archival files, which is the master images that are coming off of the scanner, which you would want to keep in any sort of digital imaging project. And then this last file group is the OCR files. And actually I couldn't find the actual MIME type for ABI FineReader files, so I included the PDF, which is a file type that they use pretty frequently. So if we look at these, they're basically it's a file group, and then within that file group we have the specific files and then the file locations. And this is presumably somewhere on the Comet Museum server. And then you have your location type, just to tell the computer that this is a URL. It's an X-link href. And so that is the file structure. It's pretty much the same for these. These would just be in a folder. These are in a compressed file. And then these are the OCR documents. And then you indicate the structure of these things with the structural map. So for here I had basically divs, and for each file group I had a div that indicated the group, and like everything in METS, it has an ID. And then beneath that I have subdivs that basically indicate the specific files, and then have a file pointer to that file. And then it has a label about what it is. This is page 2, this is page 3, this has advertisements on it, this is page 5. I guess I skipped one there. It should be page 4, I think, if the advertisements are not counted. And then also you have your title page. So this is basically imposing structure on the actual files, the technical files. This is giving some sort of structure to it, and giving a type, right? So you can tell this is a page in a larger thing. So that's the file, the structural map section for my files. And then the last section is the behavior section, and here I just indicated, I gave a structural ID to what this application would be used for, or what this behavior description is for, and this is to those file groups, or actually it's to the structural map. Structural map representations of the file group segments. And then basically you give a label, and then you give your mechanism and sort of a description. So this was basically just a README file telling you how to use it, and this was the actual application. It's an .exe file. And this is just a fictionalized comic book reader that presumably the Comet Museum could come up with their own comic book reader. And this would be a link to it. The other one that I came up with was the ABI FineReader application, which you may want to use to access those files. So yeah, that's the XML, the actual XML behind all of this organizational stuff. And I guess just in conclusion, the idea behind this whole project is to make it such that you can keep that the employees and at the comic book museum can they can more easily organize and process their files. So they can keep master files separate from published files, separate from OCR files, and they can work with them more easily. And they'll know what things were done to them, what has been done to this digital object. Was it cropped? Was the contrast increased? Whatever. But then also for the users, they can, when they're uploading, hopefully this will improve the metadata that you are getting from users, because you will require such and such fields, and so you can more easily crowdsource information. But also when they're retrieving that information, they can find comics based on the writers, based on the artists, based on what characters are in the comic books, what year, what genre. Library of Congress subject headings, all these things are included in VRA, and basically just make the actual retrieval of these comics much more useful. So that was the overall idea behind this whole organization. So I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much.